Hello guys, so welcome back to our tutorials. In today's tutorial, we're going to talk about how can we create a currency converter. And this currency converter is going to use an API. The API we are going to use is this called Free Currency API. So if you want to follow along, you can go to Free Currency API. Free Currency API, and let me just show you. So Free Currency API.com. So go here and create a free account, and then you'll get such a dashboard whereby you'll see an API key. So the process you need to follow is you go to this Free Currency API, create an account, and you'll get a free API key that we can use to convert currencies live. So these are live currencies. So for instance, if I'm converting 100, I want to convert 100 USD. So you can see we also have all these currencies. Let's try Swedish krona to USD, and then we submit. You can see a loading indicator, and then you can see that 100 USD, 100 Swedish krona is equals to 10 USD. So this is live. It has all these currencies you can convert from Australian dollar. So you can convert 100 Australian dollars to US dollars. And then if you submit this, you're going to get that 100 Australian dollars is equals to 64 US dollars. So this is using the currency API, and this is what we are going to use in this tutorial. So without wasting time, let's get started. So the very first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a style.css file, and then I'm going to create a script.js file. And then let's link all these files together. So you start linking the CSS, and then the link is style.css. And then before the closing body tag, we add our script, and the source is script.js. All right, and then we can go live. I showed you how you can go live using the live server extension, and let's get started. So what I'm going to do now, that instead of using a card now, we normally use cards like a div with a class of card. I'm going to use a form because this is a form. And this form won't have an action because JavaScript is the one that will handle all the actions. And then let's create a heading level 2, which says this is a currency converter. And then after that, let's create a div with a class of field. This one will hold the label and the field itself. So how we start that is that we create a label, and then this one will be the amount, and the label itself the amount. So we said that the 4 points to the input that you want the label to be associated with. So we create an input of type number, and the name here will be amount. So this is the name that will be submitted. When we submit, the key will be the amount, and the value will be the value inside the input. The ID here is normally used to link the 4 with the input itself, such that, for instance, if I click on this input, you can see if I click on this label, you can see if I click on the amount, the input gets highlighted. So that's the work of the 4, which points to the input that it should point to. So this input doesn't have to be together. This input could be somewhere else, but you can focus it using the input. So let's create another field. This one now, the label will be from. So this is the from. Where do you want to convert from? And then the label itself will be from. So the from here is just, as we explained, it links to an input or a select. So let's create a select, because this is a select field, because you can see we can select too many currencies. This is a select field. And then we still do the same thing, whereby the ID has to match whatever is in the 4, such that if you click on the label, then the input gets highlighted. And then when we submit this form, what do we want to have as the key? We want to have it as the from. But these names, you can just use your names here, other names. All right, let's create the final one. So dot field, and then the label will be to now 2. Then the label itself will be 2. And then the select. And then the name will be 2. This is the name that will show up when you submit. And then the ID will be the 2, which corresponds to the 4 in the label. And then, yeah, that's it. And then finally, let's create this results paragraph. So this results, so if you go back to what we have, this is what currently we have. Let's add some placeholder to the input here. So you can say placeholder eg 10. All right, that's okay. And then in our select, we don't have options. So I'm going to show you how we are going to tackle that. So next up, let's add this results paragraph. So we can just say p.results and then dot result. And then the text, let's write something like 40. We are going to change that later on. So 40. And then finally, let's add the button. So the button, you just create the button. Inside the button, you'll have two things. You'll have the submit. You saw that. Let me do this again. So 100 British pounds to US dollars. We submit. You can see the loading indicator, and then we see the result. So this means the button has two things. It has the text submit, and it has a div with the class of loader. This is our loading indicator. And that's all for the HTML. All right, so that's all for the HTML. Really, we don't have anything else to do in the HTML. Something else we might want to do is that we might want to create some options, but these options will be filled from JavaScript. These are too many options. If you see this, these are too many inputs in case we say that we wanted to add these inputs by hand. So we are going to add one. So let's go to the selects. I'm going to create an option, and the value will be USD, which is the code for that currency. And then the code itself again, and then let's add the text US dollar. Let's copy this down. I just want to show you this one will be filled by JavaScript, but for the HTML we need to just add one. So yeah, that's what we have. We have only one option. So let's go back now to the styles. Something else I want is that I want you to use the Poppins font. I've talked about this countless times, how we can use Poppins font. So you just go to fonts.google.com, look for the font you want, and click on get embed code, and then copy this import and paste it in the CSS file. Then you can remove that, and then let's save. So the next thing is the loading indicator. The loading indicator, you don't have to think about how to create a loading indicator. You can just come here and copy one loading indicator. So let's copy one of them. So we are going to copy this one. So the website is called css-loaders.com/dots. That's what I'm going to use. And then I'm just going to paste that in. And then something we want to change here. I think let's take this one. I think this one looks nicer. So then the width, let's change the width to 20 pixels. All right, so we don't have to think about CSS keyframes, how to add these loading indicators. We just copy paste them, and then you can see here it tells you to add a div with a class of loader, which is what we did here in the button. We created a div with a class of loader. All right, that's done. Let's close that. The next thing now, let's start styling. So the first thing we need to add is the default CSS. So margin 0, padding 0, and box sizing border box. And then let's now grab the body. So you can see now in our new version, you can see everything is close to the edges. So we grab the body and we say padding 2 rem. Now this one get things off the edges. And then let's make this card in the center. So we can say justify content center. But for that to work, you need to have display flex. All right, so that looks a bit nice. The next thing is that we imported the Poppins font. We need to use this Poppins font. So just copy the font name, and then you can come here and say font family, and then paste that in, surround it by the quotes, and as a fallback, let's add sans serif. All right, you can see the font has changed, and then let's change the background color. The background color I chose was hash F5, F5, F5. And then now let's start handling the form. So we have this form. This is the form. This is a form that has the heading, has all the inputs. So we can grab it and give it some style. So you can say form, and then background color here should be white. The next thing we need to do is that you can see the text is too close to the edges. So let's add some padding here. And then you can say padding 1 rem. I think 1 rem looks nice. And then let's look for box shadow. I showed you how you can create nice box shadows, but because we do have some predefined box shadows in this website, the website is called getcsscan.com/css-box-shadow-examples. And then you can select a predefined box shadow. So for instance, I think I could go with, I think this one looks nice. I think we can do this. So we can copy that and then come and paste that in. You don't have to think about box shadows. We just generate some nice box shadows. You can see now it shows up there. All right, so we can close that website. And then now we have added all that. Let's add some border radius, 5 pixels. Also, let's restrict the width. We can say width 300 pixels. All right, then it looks a bit nice. The next thing is that we want to give some gap between these elements. So we display this flex. So we can say display flex, then flex direction of column, and then a gap of 0.5. I think 0.5 is too much. Let's do 0.3. All right, that looks a bit nice. So the next thing is that we gave all these inputs a class of field, and we want to place them on top of each other. So the amount, you can see the finished version. We have now like the amount, and then the input is below. All these are wrapped inside the field class, so we can just grab them and say, so here we can say dot field, and then we can display this flex direction of column, and then let's give it a gap of maybe 0.2 rem. All right, so that looks a bit nice. So the next thing we need to work on is now the inputs themselves. So we do have the inputs and the select. You can see they are so thin. Let's style this. So how we can do this, we can grab both of them. So we have the input and the select. What we can do here is that let's add some padding. So padding vertical 5 pixels, horizontal 10 pixels. All right, that looks a bit nice. And then let's change the border radius of these elements. So we can say border radius of 5 pixels. 5 pixels is always nice. And then let's change the border to be uniform. So you can say border 1 pixel solid. Okay, I think that looks, yeah, that looks better. And then let's change the background color to distinguish the inputs. So we can say background color, which is beige. All right. And that's all for that. So the next thing, let's talk about the button. So work on the button, just grab the button. You only have one button, so we can just select it by its tag name, button. And you can see the button has 2 elements, so we can display them flex. So we can say here display flex. And then let's add some padding. Vertical maybe 7 pixels, horizontal 10 pixels. Justify content, center. Right, gap, let's add a gap between those two elements, a gap of 0.2 rem. And then we align items to the center. Align items to the center places this text and the other element to the center. Let's remove the borders. So we can say border none there. And then let's change the color to white and the background color to blue. Fantastic. So let's finally talk about this result. So the result now, you can do dot result. We can give it a background color of green. Okay. And then we can now add some color of white. This one will just display the result, but you can go ahead and style it as you want. Let's add some border radius to it. So we can say border radius 5 pixels. So you have to be uniform on the border radiuses. Then let's add some paddings. So to add some paddings here, we can say padding maybe 3 pixels. Fantastic. And that's it on the HTML and CSS side. So if you're following along to just learn about CSS, then we are done. Something else I noticed is that we need to change the color of the loader. I want it to be white. I think white will be nice. So all right. So everything is working now. Let's move on to JavaScript. So I said that we are going to use an API. So this is an API called free currency converter. And then instead of the docs, so this is the docs, I think. So freecurrencyconverter.com, freecurrencyconverterapi.com, go to that URL and then get a free API key. All right. And then after getting a free API key, then we are going to see how can we tackle these and add this functionality to our currency converter. So this is a converter you can even use and host online. So let's now see how we can work through this using JavaScript. So the first thing we always do is now in our JavaScript file, we always try to alert. So we can alert and say, hey, to see whether the JavaScript is working. The alert works. That means JavaScript is loaded as successful. So hopefully you have gotten your free API key from this. Let's go to the docs and see how can we use this API. So to use this API, there are some libraries to use the API, but I normally like to use the APIs without libraries. So the first thing we are going to go through is the authentication. So authentication means this free currency API requires us to authenticate to them when we send a request to their backend so that they can know who you are, so that they can get the usage. Like for instance, you can see they are saying, I have done 8 requests, the success rate of this request, the latency. So based on my API key, they are able to know how many times did this person hit my API, how many times did this person call our servers. So that's why you need an API key. And this API key, whenever you send a request to someone else's server and they want you to authenticate, there is a way you tell yourself. And they have said here, so this is the authentication methods. So when you look at the authentication method and the API key, so you can see free currency converter, freecurrencyapi.com uses API keys to allow access to the API. So you need to authorize yourself. Once you get your own API from their dashboard, then there's 2 ways they have for you to authenticate. One of the way is to embed your API key on the request using a query parameter. You can see it has been embedded here, and then you add your API key. The other way is using a HTTP header. So headers are ways to add more information to our request. So the requests in servers and clients work like someone sending some package to someone. So for instance, if you're using something like Bolt package and you are sending out some package to someone, you'd want to know who is sending this package, when were they sent, which method did they use. Did they use a cab? Did they use a person? Did they use a walking person? Did they use a car? You need to know all this information. So in the request of the browsers, you need to identify some of these things. So the HTTP header is used for sending out more information about yourself to the server that you are trying to make a request to. So the next thing here is that we have the base URL. This is where is this endpoint. So where are we sending a request to? And then the header we are adding. So let me show you. You can just use this. So the header we are adding should be API key. I'm going to show you how we add that using the fetch API in JavaScript. I have tutorials on how to use the fetch API, so don't worry. And then if the request is not successful, you're going to get errors. You're going to see some of these response headers. So a response header means I send some headers with my request, then the person or the server that I'm sending to sends back some response. So they send response headers. So as we send request headers, the response headers you can make up yourself, but now the server that is making the API is the one that determines what kind of servers they want. So you can see the limit, they have the quotas remaining per month. All right, enough talk. So we have our API key. Next thing is, how do we get these datas? So the first thing we need is the currency list. So in the finished version, you can see I'm listing all the currencies. All right. So the first thing is to get the currencies. How do we get all these currencies? But something I noted is that these currencies don't change. So there's no need for me sending these requests each and every time. This one will end up finishing up my requests that I am using. This is a free request. So even if it was a paid one, you're going to burn up more resources than you might need. So these currencies are hard coded. We can hard code these currencies. We can get them and hard code them in our website or in our client without us having to send a request. But there is a way to send a request. So we can send one request to get the currencies. And this is the endpoint. So this is normally called as the base URL. And this is the endpoint. The endpoint is the specific resource that you want. And the method you want, we have some few methods, HTTP methods for communication. And then when you send a request to this currencies endpoint, the endpoint is basically a way. So for instance, if you have an estate, you might have where normal people go through, that is through the gate. So this one would be through the gate. This is where a normal person goes through. Okay, you might have another section whereby the workers don't go through the gate. Maybe they have some back gates they go through. You can now have /workers. And then you can have others for maybe VVIPs. Maybe they are using the air method. They are coming through your estate through aeroplanes. Then they are not going to use the gate or the workers route. They are going now to use maybe the air route. So the route basically means some resource. I want currencies. This is where you can get the currencies. So enough talk. So this is how we send a request to get the currencies, and this is what we get. So how we can do this is that we can copy this link, even if we don't have, we can copy this link, paste it in the browser, and then add a query parameter called API key. We saw how we can do this, and then copy our API key. So I'm going to copy my API key. You have to create yours, don't use mine. So, and then say equals, then paste that in and send a request. So we don't have we get some error now. This is an error. So let's go back to the documentation. We said, so let's see how they said we send. So we send API key. So the K is not caps. So that's an issue. Remove the caps there and send. So for some reason, this one is making it caps. So let me remove all this and copy from the SDK. No, we want the currencies. So we just copy. Alternatively, you use some API clients, like one of a very common one is called Postman. So you could use that, but this one still works. We can send a request. The only thing is that here we can only send get request. All right, so we get the currencies, but now I'm not using the currencies endpoint. You can use the currencies. All right, so is it currencies? So let's see. Currencies, Control C, and then so right, so this one has some issues. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to now use an extension in VS Code called Thunder Client. So you can just search for that extension and install it. So Thunder Client. So you can install this extension and we are going to use it. So install this extension and we are going to send requests from it so that we can see the request in action. So just click it will show up here at the edges. So you just click, then we start a new request. So I want the currencies. So let's copy this. I want the currencies. And then now we saw that there are some few ways we can use to authenticate ourselves. One of the ways was using the query parameter. For some reason that was not working. I don't know why. So let's not focus on that. The other way is to send this header API key. So I'm going to go to the headers tab. I hope you can see it. I'm going to go to the headers. So query headers, and then we are going to add a header called API key. Then here we are going to paste our API key from here. All right. And then let's send this request to get the currencies. So, all right, these are the currencies. So what I could do now is that I can copy all these currencies. As we say, these currencies don't change. So there's no need of me sending these requests all the time. So I can hard code these currencies in my VS Code or in my code editor or in my program. So what I'm going to do, something else you might notice is these currencies are not in the format I'd want to use. So this format is a data object with objects, but we want it as an array. So we are getting some issues. So what I can do now, all right, so let me paste it. Let me create a currencies is equals to, let me paste what I have. So this is the response from the API, and I'm going to convert this manually. We can do this with using code. Let me see. So I can convert this into an array, and then I can go all the way to the bottom. I want to convert this into an array. So now I don't want this. I don't want the euro symbol. We can remove all these symbols. I think there are too many. So I'm going to do this. You can do that as well, but I'm going to do that, and you can use JavaScript to do it, but I'm going to do that off camera. And this is what I came up with. So this is an array of currencies. that are not changing, and then you can see the name, the code, all those. And then I'm going to collapse that so that we can focus more on JavaScript and how JavaScript can help us. All right, so first of all, let's create the base URL. So you can say const base URL is equals to, let's go and grab the base URL. So now the next endpoint we are focused on should be the endpoint for getting latest exchange. So let's read through this. So the latest exchange receives two parameters. So one of it is the API key, that one we have solved. Now the next one is the base currency. So which currency are you formatting from? And then the currencies, do you want to convert this currency to a multiple currency or one currency? So this is how you are supposed to send it. So are you converting to one currency or multiple? If it's multiple, you write them separated by a comma. And this is the sample response. So you get a data object with the keys being the codes of the currency. I know this is too much talk, but enough of the talk. But let's copy the base URL. This is the base. No, the base URL is this one. Command C. And then let's paste this in here and remove the slash. So that's the base URL. So first of all, we get the base URL. And as soon as we get the base URL, this is what I want to do. So the first thing I want to get is let me show you. So the from select. So this is the select. I said we have these currencies as an array. This is the currencies as an array. I want to display these currencies in this select even before someone submits. So I need access to this select and this select. And you might notice they both contain the same details. So what I'm going to do now is to create a variable called from select. And the reason I'm using from select because this is the select that is holding the data of from. This is the select I'm talking about. So from select is equals to document dot query selector, and then we grab hash from. So the from select has an ID of from. Then let's grab the to select is equals to document dot query selector and then hash 2. All right. So as soon as we have those two, we can now start creating a function. I'm going to create a function called init. So this function will run even before someone submits this form, right? So how we can do this is that let's create options as an empty string, and then we have the currencies. So here is where the headache was. We have now the currency. So we can loop these currencies and format some options to insert to these select fields. So what we do now here is currencies dot for each currency. So we use this loop for each currency. We create a new option and append it to the existing option. So this plus or equals is same as options equals to options plus the new string. And then now we format a string. We can now grab the option here. So in each currency, create an option. You can see. So in each currency, create an option and the value will be currency. So the value will be currencies. So we have currency and each currency has a code. This is the code we are going to send to the backend API. So we can say the value will be currency.code. All right. So the text here will also be c.code. And then this one will be the name. So we go here back and then you can see we have the name. Where is that name? So this is the name of the currency. So we can now come here and say $name. No, not name, c.name. All right, so that's done. Then finally, we just insert the new option. So this one will be a very long string of each currency. And then we insert the new options to the from select and to the to select. So we can say from select dot inner HTML is equals to options. And then we do the same for the to select. All right, so that's done. And then now we can call init immediately. We don't care. So we just call init, or we could use some fancy functionality in JavaScript called immediately invoked function. So you wrap the function in parentheses and call it. And then let's go back and remove the options now. So let's remove the options to each select. And then save. Now, something you realize is that now we have all the options, all the currencies. And then because of time now, let's now finish up this section and then work on the submit. So the next thing now after that, we need to get access to the form itself because someone is submitting. So you can say const form is equals to document dot query selector, and then we grab the form. If you have any question, you can ask. And then also something else we need is the result. The result, we give it a class of result. So we can say document dot query selector and then dot result. And then finally, we also need access to the loading indicator. We gave it a class of loader. That is the class that was assigned. So we can just grab it as well. So we can say const loader is equals to document dot query selector and then dot loader. All right, so that's done. So something else I want to do is that I want now to hide the loading indicator. So I'm going to the style.css and then grab the loading indicator and say display. Now we are going to display it back using JavaScript. The result as well should be displayed none. Right. That looks a bit nice. So now the process that we have is that now let's first grab the data from the submission. So we are going to call the form. We add an event listener, and the event we want to add is a submit event. And then before we forget, let's look at the button. Let's add a type of submit so that it can be used to submit the parent form. All right. And then we create now like this. So submit. And then the next argument, as we said, is always the handler function, the function that handles this event. And then it receives an event. And then this event will be asynchronous because we are going to send a request back to someone else's server. All right. The first thing we always do is something called event.prevent default. This prevents the browser from trying to submit this form. And then let's try to get some data. So we can use form data. We can call the variable form data, and then we can use this JavaScript web API whereby we can grab the data from the form using this. So you can create an instance called new form data and pass it event.target. So the event.target is the form itself. So from the form data, we can get access to the data from the from, the amount, and the to. So let's do that. So const from is equals to form data dot get from, and const to is equals to form data dot get to, and then const amount equals to form data dot get amount. All right, now let's console log all these data. So console.log from, and then from, and then the next one will be to, and then to, and the next one will be amount, and then amount. All right, so let's also save the index.html, open the inspect, go to the console. All right, so I want to convert 100 USD from US dollar to euro and then submit. All right, you can see we got all the data. We got from USD to euro and then the amount. This is all the data from the DOM. All right, so we know the data is working. Now let's send this data back and format it as we want. So the first thing I want to do is I want to do some checks. One of the checks I want to do is the check that someone doesn't convert from euro to euro. So that doesn't make sense. So that let's focus on that. So we can say if from is equals to 2, then we can alert and say error, same currency detected. And then we remember to return. Okay, we have solved that issue. The next issue would be someone sending an invalid amount. So how we can do that is now we can use another check and say if is not a number amount, we convert the amount from the DOM to a number. And if it's not a number, we also alert and say error, invalid number, then return. So we have done the two checks that are common. If you have other checks, you need to add. Now, something else I want to do, I don't want to send the request from this handler function. I'm going to create another function to do that job. So I'm going to create another function and call it, I'll create an asynchronous function. To create an asynchronous function, you start with the async keyword, asynchronous function, and the name will be fetch conversion. So this is the function that will be used to send now the actual request. So this one is used to handle the request. This one is used to send the request. It is going to receive the to and from. And then you are going to use a new ES6 version of sending request. So you are going to use a try catch here. And then if there is an error, we can console.log the error. So don't worry, if you are floating, you'll learn about all these. So console.error, and then we return null. So take note of what this function returns. I did a tutorial on functions. So a function can either return data, it can return data or it cannot. And if a function doesn't return data, it returns undefined by default. But this one, I'm implicitly telling it to return null if there is an error, because I'm going to try and handle the result of this function. Inside here now, this is where we send a request to the server. So I'm going to say const response is equals to, I think this async await is always very tough to deal with. I don't know whether we could use the promises, the then and, but let's focus on this. I think it's also good to learn. So we are going to use the fetch API from JavaScript, and we remember to await this. So we say fetch. I can see time is too much gone, so I'm not going to explain a lot. So we are sending a request to the base URL, but the endpoint we are looking at is the latest endpoint. I showed you all this. So the latest endpoint receives the base currency, and it receives the currencies. It could be multiple currencies or one currency. In our case, it's one currency. So the latest endpoint, the currencies is equals to the 2. So which currency are we converting to? This is what the currencies hold. And then the base currency now will be from. So where are you converting from? You can read more about this documentation here. It is very quite straightforward. And then if you have an issue, you can always ask on the chat. So the next thing is now let's pass the headers. I told you there is a way we can send headers. This is a request we are sending out. We need to pass more information. And in our case, the information we care about is just the API key. Then I'm just going to copy the API key. So here you're going to add your own API key, because mine I'm going to disable it after the video. So paste that API key. So we have the response. When using async await, one of the best thing is to check if the response is okay. So the response that comes back, we can say response. So if response is okay, this one will hold a boolean. So we want to try and check if the response is not okay. And then if it's not, we throw a new error. And then you can say failed to convert. So you can add more details here. You can add the status text. You can add the status code. But in my case, I don't care. So if an error is thrown here, it is caught here. And then the function returns null. All right. So finally, const data, we can now get the data from the response. So the latest currency exchange returns such, it returns such data. So we need to get the JSON data from it. So we can say await res.json. All right. So as soon as we get the res.json, this is the kind of data we are going to get. This is the data we are going to get. But in our case, we're only sending one currency, the 2, and then so after that, rest in this function, we just return data.data. So I called it data, and the request that comes back also has data. So we need to return data.data. Then we can close this function and go back to our handler function. I know this is a lot if you are new to programming, but you still learn. So we do the checks, and now here, this is where now we call the backend. But before we call the backend, let's show a loading indicator. So we can say loader dot style dot display equals block. So we are going to show the loader back by toggling its back, and then const data, we get the data, we call our function we just created, and then it wants a to and a from. So we have those. So we got those here from the DOM. All right. So like that. And then, so we have a to and a from. So this data, as we said, it could either return the data as we specified here, the response here, or it could return null, because I did return implicitly null if there is an issue. That means we could check for the errors. So we could check, let me show you how we could check. So that means this data will either hold valid data or null. So we can say if not data now, if there is an issue with the data, we just alert the user, then failed to fetch, just like that. We don't pass more information to the user, the security breach. Then we return null. So if there is an issue when converting, sending a request back to the API, we just show the user some alert. Otherwise, something else we also forgot. By this time, by this line I'm currently at, we already have a response, so we can hide the loading indicator. So we can say style dot display equals none. So now we have the data. Let's now show the result. So we just do, we have the result. This is the result. So we can now show the result to the UI. So we can say result dot text content is equals to data. So we get the data. We said the data can be a valid data which is similar to this data. And then something else, you can note that the data, the keys are formatted by the currency code AED, USD, all those. So that means, this means that we can use data. We want the to. Remember, we sent out the to, so we can use the to as the key to grab that Note here we cannot use a dot because we are accessing a dynamic property, the two. This one might be USD. And then we multiply it by the number of amount, because now this one corresponds to 1. So what about now the amount the user passed? And we can format the amount using the number to make sure it's a number. And we can use dot to local string to make sure the thousands are separated by a comma. And then result. Let's show the result. So result dot style dot display equals block. So I know that was a lot. So if you are following along, this is the kind of tutorial you follow along when you are trying to code yourself, so that you can understand all these concepts. If you don't understand, all this code is available in my GitHub repository, and the GitHub repository is called TikTok-projects. So you just do github.com/techwithtwin/TikTok-projects, and then go through the code line by line, and you will understand everything. So let's try now this finally. I want to convert 100 Japanese yen to USD. So Japanese yen to USD, and then let's submit. All right. So there's an issue. So the issue is we are getting now, I think we are getting the Japanese yen to USD. Let's try on Google. So I think we could. So what about 100 100 Japanese yen? I think we are correct. That our conversion is correct. So let's try to let's try Australian dollars. So 100 Australian dollars to US dollar. That's 64 US dollars. So I think it's working. I just thought that the conversion was too low. So that's it, guys. That's how you create such a project. This is a complex project. The concepts used here are the concepts used in day-to-day applications. So for instance, which are the, I don't know whether we can get, for instance, if you are paying through something like Stripe, this is the format of the responses that are sent out via the API. You need to authenticate yourself to Stripe. Stripe initializes grabbing the money from someone's card, and then it credits to your account and then sends a response back. This is the current concept that is used in day-to-day applications. Every application follows this format, whether it's PHP, whether it's .NET, whether it's Next.js, etc. So thank you for watching. Make sure you like and comment something you have learned today. And thank you. Share with your friends, and thank you.